The Marsh Boys podcast is brought to you by
Papa Earl's, Cajun seasoning at its best. Use it on chicken, beef, fish, vegetables, Bloody Marys, and everything in between. Check out their fish fry for that perfect golden crispiness and that great Cajun flavor.
And Top Down Decoys, the most affordable silhouette decoy on the market. Their horizontal and vertical styles are both a perfect fit for adding numbers to your snow, speck, and Canada spread.
You can check out all of our great sponsors through the link in any of our social media bios. Thank you, and we hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Hey, take it!
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Marsh Boys podcast. I'm your host, Brian. Today's episode is a little different. Today we'll be doing a crossover episode with the Okayest Trapper Podcast. That's hosted by Zach Hanson. He is also the author of Turning Feral. He lives in Idaho. He's a trapper. He wrote, like I said, he's the author of Turning Feral. And he also traps wolves, which is really cool. I'm a dummy. I forgot to hit record when we first started recording the podcast, so there's a couple minutes missing. We're going to jump right in. I hope you guys enjoy this episode just as much as I did. Zach was great to talk to. He has a lot of insight, great conversation. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy. Go check out the Okayest Trapper Podcast and his book, Turning Feral.
I'm shooting my bow. He's like, well, why aren't you trapping? I'm like, what? You mean the stuff with those little traps with like the jaws on it that hurt animals? And he's like, no, I'm talking about trapping. Like, he's like, if you want to become a better hunter, luckily where we're at in Idaho, there's some stuff that's open year round. He's like, you should be trapping. And I had no idea. So frankly, he kind of took me under his wing. He had not been trapping for a long time, but kind of coached me up on like, hey, here's some stuff you should go buy. Like, let's trap some fox and badger. Those are year round here in Idaho. And then from then it was like the floodgate. So a fox was my first real parry into trapping.
Now, did you start with, there's a huge difference between trapping in New Jersey and what I've done and pretty much the entire rest of the country. Since 1984, 1985, leg hold traps have been illegal to not only use, but possess in the state of New Jersey. And just as of recently, I think 2014 or 2015, dog proofs or encapsulated traps became legal. That was a big stink. So like we're very, very bound to, cable restraints, and, dog proof traps. When you started catching fox, was that, leg hold traps, or were you running snares or cables, or how did that go about?
So luckily in Idaho, we are one of the, I want to back up on what you said about like, obviously New Jersey's got a lot of tough regulations and you got to do what you got to do within the trapping realm. But I wouldn't say it's unlike most of the rest of the country. I mean, there's so many other states that have gone down that path where there's so much limited in the use of devices for trapping, even Washington State, Oregon, a lot of those, it's all kind of dwindling down. But in Idaho, we're still very lucky. So it was foothold traps. So I had like, I don't even remember what size trap I had, little fox traps. But, I started with that, which was, easier than snaring in my mind because I've realized that I'm a terrible snareman. And I'm trying to get better. I'm really trying to redeem myself this year, especially now that I'm tired of lugging wolf traps into the backcountry and snares are a lot lighter. But ultimately it was footholds for fox. And it took me about, from the time that I first started, and I had a healthy fox population where I'm at, about a month and a half to have my first, connection.
Yeah, I've only ever ran, let's see, if technically 3, if you times them by the nights, 24 cable restraints. Mm-hmm. And that was this past year when I caught my otter. That was the first time I ever ran cables. Up until this point, it was all dog proof traps. I'm very, very much a raccoon man.
Yeah, I mean, I'm bummed that we don't have raccoons here because I do love raccoons.
You don't even have them when you get down into maybe some of the more.
You do.
Okay.
You do, like up in the high alpine where we're at. Like we might occasionally have one little trash panda show up, but then he's just so cute and he's so far up. You don't want to mess with him. But then but getting down closer to the valley, like in Boise and some of the surrounding areas, yeah, we do have coons.
Okay. So when did you transition into wolf trap? Because I know, listening to all your podcasts and a bunch of other stuff you've done, that's kind of what you love to do, correct?
Yeah, I'm terrible at it. I mean, as a statistics show, but yeah, it was about I think it was my third year trapping where I was like, had the idea and had talked to enough people and went and got the equipment and said, I'm gonna wolf trap. And part of that was because I'd been talking to people in some of the associations, some of the shows that I go to and the conventions. However, the biggest thing was like at my cabin, I can be sitting out on my porch and you can just hear the wolves going off. We have 5 or so packs that kind of just rotate around our area. Every time I'd be out elk hunting, I'd maybe see a wolf, even out where I was bow hunting for mule deer, I came up on a pack, busted them, and then I was like, well, they're not going to be back in this little draw for another 10 plus days. So I came back the next weekend and there was either the same or a different pack. So like we were just crawling with wolves. So it was part that I had just been exposed to it and it seemed interesting, and part of actually seeing kind of the damage and, just the sheer numbers that we have up here.
So speaking to somebody with personal experience with wolves, you hear the stories. I've been all over the Colorado deal. That's a very messy situation. It has since the beginning of it. Wisconsin's very messy with it. It seems like Montana's not handling it the best, but you don't quite hear of Idaho's problem like you're talking. Me personally, I haven't really heard of Idaho's problem. Is it as bad as, neighboring states? Is it worse than neighboring states? Is it something that you could see getting completely out of hand?
It's already out of hand. I'm going to butcher the numbers, but for anybody listening, go listen to any of the podcasts with Justin Webb for Foundation for Wildlife Management. But I think our carrying capacity that had been projected was in the mid hundreds when they reintroduced wolves in the 90s, and I think we're now like well over like getting up close to 2,000.
That's a lot of wolves.
And we have very like open hunting, but it's very opportunistic. There's a handful of guys who are going out and really hunting wolves and doing it well. But you can, if you're coming in from out of state, if you're in state, you can go and buy a wolf tag at the grocery store, right? But they're just hard to hunt. Yeah. And then we're really relying on trappers across so many units that are overrun with wolves. Like there's myself and maybe 4 or 5 other trappers for this entire unit that are really targeting wolves and taking a few out here and there, right? Maybe like 2 or 3 a season. And then that's not including all, the litters that are being born every single year. And there's areas up in like central and north Idaho. I was talking to a buddy who had been on my podcast, and I can't remember what zone it is, but it's central Idaho. And he's like, my buddy had drew a tag for that. And I was just asking him like, hey, how's kind of like the elk numbers up there? He's like, don't even bother. He's like, throw that tag away. He's like, there are too many wolves and there are just no elk left, period. Like you can go for days without seeing any elk sign. And what was previously a very healthy elk zone. So I would say it's way out of hand from the numbers perspective. Now from the regulation to trap, Idaho is still on the upper echelon of, freedom to do that, and encouraging from both Fish and Game and obviously Foundation for Wildlife Management, the trapper associations. Like I think a lot of hunters realize the need for it and support the trapping that goes into it.
That's what was going to be my follow-up question. Is there an acknowledgement that you guys have a problem?
Yeah, I think at least it depends on who you ask. Ask an animal rights activist, no, there's no problem. They're doing fantastic. Yeah. But, from the depredation perspective of like a lot of the ranchers are having to hire, trappers, especially on the private land area where wolves are dropping down and killing calves and other livestock. The deer and elk numbers, like it doesn't ever seem to be reflected in like the Fish and Game, like wildlife count. But man, like just boots on the ground, like, I'm out in our unit all the time. almost every day. And like in the past 5 years, I've been able to see a difference in the ungulates, just like numbers and their migration patterns. It's just changed.
And I mean, we kind of see the same thing around us with turkeys and coyotes. Even to be completely honest, raccoons and turkeys. I've just this year I got on a very, very new property. Nobody's trapped it in 20 years. Actually, we're family friends with the guy, and I knocked on it. And he goes, "You want to trap?" He goes, "I didn't think people still trapped." And I said, "Yeah." And then his follow up deal was, "You're too young to trap, aren't you?" I said, "Well, to some people, I guess." But I caught more coons in a week than I had in 3/4 of the season. It was. I kind of got out there on a rough day, and I had after work, and I had to set was real quick. So it wasn't like I was setting on proper sign. I was just kind of setting my 12.5 dog proofs where I could, and where I thought I would get lucky. And I think I caught 12. I want to say I caught 11 or 12 in 4 or 5 days. Wow. And I easily could have trapped that the rest of the season, and probably could have caught twice that many. But it's and I don't think New Jersey doesn't recognize raccoons as a predator. And I think the debate there is between is a nest raider a predator or not? But yeah,
it is in my book.
Yeah. You and me both, and to a bunch of people that I've talked to, it's the same thing. But to get into that, and I asked if they acknowledged that there was a problem, if they're having an issue. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's Wisconsin or Michigan that for a long time, or they still might not say that they have a resident population of wolves.
It might even be both. I've had multiple people on the podcast who have caught wolves in, I think, one or both of those states. And some were tagged for fish and game work. They were out coyote trapping and caught a wolf, and that seems to be a more and more frequent occurrence. They're migrating, and that's the thing. Like the same with the Colorado wolves. Like they don't know state borders. No. They don't know boundaries, and they travel a lot, like long distances. Yeah. And that's the hard thing with wolf trapping is like you get on fresh sign and those suckers are gone. They could be 100 miles away in like a day.
Now, do they kind of work like coyotes in your opinion? Do they have a 10 to 17 day cycle?
Little longer. So I would say they're more like a 25 to 35 day cycle, at least in our area. Like they'll come back and work around, but they work such a big circle. It's definitely on a more of like a monthly basis. So like the packs that we have, they're working it, but they're on a much longer time frame than coyotes tend to be.
Now, I am sure you remember this experience. It's probably singed into your mind. Now, prior to catching a wolf, so to kind of shed a light on what I'm going to ask, have you caught a coyote or just fox prior to this? As far as canines?
Both.
Okay. So you've caught fox, you've caught a coyote. What was it like walking up on a wolf compared, first in general, walking up on a wolf and then comparing it to a coyote or a fox?
Yeah. Wow. I mean, it's interesting because I did it in like a very linear fashion. Like first it was a fox, right? And even that was my first animal I caught. So walking up on that was just like shocking. It's like, oh wow, like this is a critter, and it doesn't want to be there, and it's kind of mean.
Yeah.
It's not docile. So you can start to see like the realities of what wild animals are. They're not your domestic pet. And then the coyote, same thing. Like, you go up on a coyote for the first time, having only trapped fox, and you're like, wow, that's a big dog. I have a 130-pound Cane Corso, but like something about a wild dog, with the fur, like they look big, right?
Yeah.
And same thing, like teeth gnarling, like, not want to be there. Like it's not a domestic pet. But to give a little bit of a precursor to this answer, like the first time I ever heard a wolf was when I was elk hunting in the White Clouds in Idaho. It was my first year out here. And we were in camp. It was like late at night. or not late at night. It was like dusk, evening, and all around our camp, wolves just started howling, going off. And like, I've never had an experience outside of some stuff with bears where my hair just stood up like on the back of my neck. Like there's just something about hearing a set of wolves in the wild, way, way, way out in the backcountry as the sun's setting that is absolutely unnerving. And then it was like 2.5 years later that I was able to walk up on my first wolf. And again, like I have a 130-pound Cane Corso. I've been up on coyotes. Like you just don't underestimate the size. Like they don't weigh that much. You know, it could be a huge wolf in Alaska is going to be 150 pounds. Here, like a huge wolf would be like creeping up on 100, maybe 110 pounds. But even like the juvenile wolves, like it is shocking how large these canines are. And then, you know, post-dispatch, like when you start to look at their jaw structure and the teeth, like it's more like looking at a bear than it is a coyote or a fox. And that's what was always, or had left a big impression on me.
That's, you know, I've never caught a fox, and that was a huge thing my last week of the season. I tried real hard, just couldn't get very lucky. Or a coyote, and, you know, you hear the sizes. So here on the East Coast, we have, you know, larger coyotes than you guys have. Our coyotes are, you know, 40, 50, upper 50s, low 60s on real big ones. And just, I don't think people realize, like they hear a 40-pound dog, you know, that could be some grandma's fat Cocker Spaniel.
Yeah.
You know, these wild canines, they don't carry all that fat in their gut. They're larger, bigger creatures.
Yep.
Was it intimidating coming up on your so when you came up on your first wolf, was it live?
Yes.
How intimidating was that?
It was only less intimidating than it would have been because I had been with a trapper who had a mountain lion in a trap that I had gotten to be a part of, like releasing. That was scary. Because also that was a situation where it was being released unharmed. When I came up on the wolf, like it was scary. It was a good catch. So I wasn't worried about anything like happening, and I knew what was going to happen. So I had less nerves than I did with like walking up around a big cat that had to be released. But like it was the same hair-raising experience that I had when I first heard of wolves. Because I've always been very tied to wolves, you know, like Call of the Wild. Mm-hmm. Like I have a huge wolf photo. Like that was one of the things I brought with me after my divorce that just stuck with me, that I was in my grandfather's cabin when I was little. And, you know, it was weird. It was like the whole spirit animal thing, like just being able to be around it was just cool and intimidating. Again, like just that hair-raising realization of how you immediately understand why they're an apex predator or the apex predator.
You know, and even, I mean, this doesn't even come close to scale, but even the first time I came up on a raccoon, you know, I didn't realize the density, the strength that they had, the wittiness of them. You know, I think people underestimate a lot of these animals because of, you know, movies and TV shows. Yeah, 100%. You took the word out of my mouth. Yeah, the Disney effect.
Don't sue us, Disney. Sorry. Did we say Disney? I meant to say Wisney.
Yeah.
Everybody knows what we're talking about. But, you know, but on that too, like seeing the wolves, but just to kind of nod back to, you know, your trapping and what you've just gotten with an otter, honestly, like having kind of done the full gamut of different critters from a pound for pound strength and like ferocity and fear, I am just glad there are not wolf-sized otters running around, because those suckers are strong, mean, and just killing machines.
So we can get into that. I had when I got into trapping, you know, I'd seen otters before. Very rarely, maybe once or twice in my life, I'd physically seen an otter. It was funny. I got my trapping license, and a couple days later, we were fishing on my uncle's dock, and an otter swam across. And I looked at my buddy Ryan, who's normally here, and I said, I want to catch otters. And in New Jersey, it's a lottery system. It is one, you know, it's so many permits per zone. I have everything written down. I forget how many zones there are, and I want to say there's up to 20 something zones. There's only 140. 2024, there was only 146 permits given out in the whole entire state of New Jersey.
Mhm.
The zone I trap in, or the zone I did trap in, is the highest percentage of, we give out the most permits. So the first year I trapped, I applied, did not get one. This year I applied, and I woke up, I got the email, and I immediately went into the app and I checked everything, and I called my buddy flipping out. I'm like, man, I got an otter permit. Like, this is nuts. And I have to give half the credit of me catching an otter to my buddy Colby Etherton, the coyote man. We went to high school together. He's only been trapping for, I think, 5 years now, but he's gotten just dove straight into it. He actually teaches a part of the New Jersey education system for their trapping course now.
Awesome.
So we've had him on the podcast a handful of times, and he told me, he goes, if you pull a permit, let me know. We'll go out. So I took a Friday off from work. We went out, set some traps. And he goes, look, it's, we're probably going to get a good freeze. These otters they're not going to stick to regular patterns because the water's frozen. So just give it time. And I set traps. It froze 2 days later. So I had set for a total of 8 nights. The day it unthawed, I went and checked after work. Or no, I'm sorry, I called him on a Saturday. So we actually goose hunted it. And after goose hunting, I went and checked. And there he was. And
That's
yeah, I told my buddy, like, before I even physically saw the otter, I was like, whatever's in this cable is probably going to be the coolest experience I've had in the outdoors to date. And it was kind of on a bridge set, so it came up a platform. It wasn't a slide. And there was pylons down bottom. And I had him on a 72-inch extension cable we tied to a tree because we wanted him down in the reeds, not up, on top of the bridge. The bridge was off the road a little ways, but still, you don't want seeing that. So I looked at the extension, and the extension's got some slack in it. And the way he was is like, there was no option but to get inside the catch circle to either get around the other side just to kind of get eyes on him. Cause I dispatched with a 22, so I had to lay eyes on him to know what I was doing. So I get down, and it's probably 15 feet on a slope, and then like a 2-foot rock platform, and then the water, a rock bank. And I looked under the bridge, and there he was. And I did not realize this at the time. So I got my 22 loaded, and I'm watching him, and I could just see his back. I got him caught by the armpit, or right behind the front legs. And I know it's a secure catch. So he finally, after
how many feet did you have?
72 inches. Okay. That's what?
A couple feet. Yeah. That's more than enough to have a very fast otter running around.
And this was, at the time I didn't know this, but this was a 22-pound otter. And
good size.
Yeah. And there was this little laurel tree that I didn't know, but he had wrapped himself around like 4 or 5 times. So he comes on the backside of this laurel tree, and I was told, be very, very careful with your shot placement on an otter because you don't realize how small their brain is and how flat their head is. So where you would normally dispatch a raccoon, you got to be about an inch down towards their nose to dispatch an otter. So I'm trying to figure out, I'm being very careful. I don't want to mess anything up. I don't want to cause harm to the animal. And he starts growling and lunges. So I immediately almost fell backwards, and he caught himself. And at that, he teeth out everything. And at that point, I knew, all these stories about otters being probably the most ignorant creature you could catch in New Jersey on a trap line was very, very true. I wasted no time dispatching the animal. And yeah, that was still, it's going to be really, really hard to top that, and I'm sure a lot of people listening on your side probably caught 15 to 20 otters. They might catch 5 otters a year. In New Jersey, it's a luxury. It's not something we get to do every day. And
well, what's funny about that is in Idaho, it surprised me. There's definitely not open season on otters. They're very restricted, actually. There's an open season, but and there's, I think, 5 regions that they separate otters into with Idaho has I think the most rivers in the lower 48, obviously outside of Alaska. So like we have tons of critters, right? Especially of otters. But in our zone, which is multiple units, there's a limit during the season to 15 total otters.
Oh, really?
And 15 total otters, that's amongst all trappers across like 5 or 6 units with hundreds of miles of river systems. So like I caught one otter this year. I was actually the first person to check it in our unit. And then the previous year, I had caught one early. And then on the second one, the quota had been met. And, so I was able to keep the otter because I was able to call and get with our Fish and Game wildlife officer and say, hey, I'm within the 24-hour window of this being closed. Can I keep it? And, I had to work with them and we were able to. But that's a very small number for such big areas. There's always like push in the commissions to up the otter quota. But, there's a lot of other states like Ohio and these other ones where you see people just stacking otters and it's really cool to see. But we're not quite down to a lottery system, but we definitely, it's far and few between here in Idaho with people getting their otters.
Yeah, what's really a shame is, and I hope this pays dividends, me catching one this year, I'm really hoping they take into account the people that are successful in catching into the following year's lottery. So if you look in the New Jersey Fish and Wildlife Digest, it'll tell you that successful beaver trappers have first opportunity at an otter permit. What I'm hoping is that successful otter trappers have, first rights to an otter permit, because once again, 2024, 146 otters permits handed out, 1 otter per permit. And another thing that goes along with that is you're only allowed to set 3 otter-specific traps per day. So, which off of 1 otter limit, I understand you don't want to set 12 traps, catch 12 otters. But in 2024, there was only 40 successful trappers for otters.
Were there even 146 trappers that put in for those otter permits?
Yes. And I think they filled, I think the total roundabout number was 138 were given out during the or were claimed after the lottery, and there was only a handful that were over the counter. And I've talked to a couple guys, and they're like, you have to be online at 8 a.m. that day to get your otter permit over the counter if it's available.
Well, I mean, that's cool though, but it goes to show, like, I don't think anybody can understand, similar to like the wolves, the power and ferocity of an otter until you're like stepping in the water with one.
Yeah.
And it goes to show too, like, healthy numbers mean something. Like, our rivers are so recreated in the summertime, and you've probably heard too, like, I know the Meat Eater folks had the ladies who were attacked by those otters in Montana, 2 years ago, where one got her ear ripped off, almost died.
Yeah.
And it got all tore up just by 2 regular sized river otters. Like, they're the potential for human critter conflict with otters, I think, especially in these areas, like even New Jersey, where people are going to be out on the water, swimming, like, is a pretty serious thing that might not be taken into consideration.
Yeah. And everything I've heard is, so say you got a farm pond you've stocked with bass, trophy bass. If you get a pack, whatever they're called, of otters, if you get otters in that pond, you will have no fish in a week, depending on the size of the pond. They can decimate a fish population very easily.
Well, that's one reason, so we, in our little town, have a fish ladder. We're at the headwaters of the Boise River and the Sawtooth, and we're the last fish ladder up. There haven't been salmon up here since the 1800s, and I think they logged the first 2 salmon up in our little area this past year. But they had a real concern with the otter, because the otter will sit at the bottom of that fish ladder and just gorge on bull trout.
Yep.
And of course, anything else coming through there, whether it's salmon or any other fish, they'll just sit there and just feast.
Yeah. But no, I definitely, I would love to turn that into something that I do every year, is catch an otter every year.
Well, speaking of doing something with it, are you going to do anything? Are you going to get it mounted? Are you just getting it tan? Like, what's the what's the taxidermy protocol for that? Because that sounds like a pretty cool experience.
So I and I figured we'd get into this. I don't flesh a lot of stuff myself. I either sell it or take it to a guy on the round. And I was just listening to one of your podcasts lately about how there's nobody that really does that anymore, and we're very, very lucky. There's a guy in Lower Alloys Creek that takes whatever you have, charges you amount, you get it back soft tanned. So I took it to him, and he said, "Well, do you have a tack? Like, what do you want to do with it?" And I said, "I'm getting it full body mounted. Like, I'm going to get it full mounted." And we were going to put it in the living room, and then I took a picture with it, the gripping grin, as most people do, and I sent it to my fiance, and she was like, "That's not going in the living room." She saw it, quote, "It's little Paul's." So it's going to go up here on the wall when I get it back. It was a pretty troubling time finding a taxidermist that would do it. Luckily I got a hold of a guy in Cherry Hill. I can't remember off the top of my head. But he said, I've fleshed them, I've skinned them, I've soft tanned them. I can do that process. I'll definitely try mounting it for you. And I was like, yeah, as long as you think you can do it, I'm 100% fine with that. So, when I get the funds to do it, it's going to go. But right now it's soft tanned, or it's getting tanned. In New Jersey, when you catch an otter, the final process of that is you have to turn it into the state. You have to turn the carcass in, and then I believe the hide gets stamped. Mm-hmm. And they have to inspect it and do measurements and everything. So the guy, Kyle Fisher, he called me and he said, "Hey, I can do all this for you." And it just happened to be a weekend that I was busy that definitely wouldn't have been an inconvenience, but it was very convenient that he was like, "Yeah, I got 6 other otters here I have to take. I can take yours too." So I should be getting that back in about a week or so with a couple of early season raccoons I caught and sent to him. And, till he goes to the taxidermist, he'll be on the wall.
Cool. Yeah, no, I just sent an otter pelt to somebody, but yeah, I mean, there's such a luxurious fur too. It's really cool. And the one I caught this year, it was for us, like most of the otters I've caught have been in the 30-pound range. I've been just heavy, both over 5 feet, nose to tail, big critters. But the one that I caught this year early was a smaller female, and she was like maybe 28 pounds, still a good size otter. And I took it to the taxidermist, my buddy Walt Clemens here, and he's going to do a full body mount for me as well. I'm going to get it where she's kind of stepping off a ridge, and there's going to be like an acrylic cutaway. So it's like the water, and there's going to be a fish in there, and then a trap, like a foothold.
So that's cool.
Yeah, so it's going to be looking like she's about to step down as she's going after the fish. It's going to be a pretty cool little setup with snow on the ground and everything. Now, when that happens, again, funding's always a big issue. And I have a similar, my wife, I don't know if she's going to be ready for that to be on the wall, so it might be out here in my garage, but it's going to be cool nonetheless.
Yeah, I wanted mine up on like a rock bank looking up. I love the white on the face of otters. And I definitely wanted to, show that off. So I'm going to get him standing up like he's looking out over the room.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a question, though, because I think a lot of the listeners on my end might not know it. I mean, we talk about snares and we talk about cable restraint devices. Obviously, you guys are dealing with cable restraint devices. Can you just explain, a snare, for better or worse, that is a lethal device, right? It's a conibear. It is meant to dispatch the animal. But as you mentioned, like with your cable restraint device, you were coming up on a live animal. Can you just explain a little bit about the rules in New Jersey? Because I'm ignorant to that too, but I hear things, but I've never had to contend with that myself.
Absolutely. Let me see if I can. Oh, it won't let me do that. Sorry, I'm back. I have everything written down, but I was going to see if I could get out there to look at it. So there's a lot of regulations that go into cable restraints. Your loop cannot exceed, I'm going to get crucified for this. It's either 12 or 14 inches. It cannot be more, the top of the loop cannot be more than 24 inches from the walking surface. So, it could be, if you're running a crossing log or something like that, that's your walking surface. It has to be made of specific cable. It has to have it has to have a swivel on it. It has to have Oh, it cannot. I'm sorry, it cannot have a lock on it, and it has to have a deer stop on it 4 or 6 inches from the bottom of from the end of the loop. So
Okay.
the cable restraint is designed so it works exactly like a snare, other than the fact that if a deer steps its leg through one, which a deer will never do, but if a deer releases pressure, it's supposed to open the cable back up. Deer can step out.
Hmm.
But if anybody's ever seen how a deer gets into trouble, that's never going to happen. I've heard of plenty of guys.
Breakaways. I mean, we have that breakaways on our snares for, like you said, an undulate genuinely will continue to pull, and you get X poundage of pressure and it will snap the snare. Do you guys have breakaways too, or does rely on the animal to kind of like slow down to be able to open up the loop?
So you can, there's nothing saying you can't use breakaways. A lot of people don't because of the deer stops, because of the style of cable we're running. So say a coyote gets caught in a trap, when that coyote hits the end of the line, and like I said, a lot of times they won't do it, just like your dog on a leash. If the animal backs up, that will release pressure.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're obviously, like you said, they're not a kill trap. I haven't heard of anybody like having issues with cable restraints compared to snares. I'm sure a lot of old timers don't like coming up on live coyotes.
Mm-hmm.
I have definitely, I've definitely had stories of guys that run cable restraints that will dispatch a coyote before you get there. Just if you're in really thick timber, you got a lot of shrubs and they get wrapped up, it can happen.
Yep.
But I think New Jersey's done a very, very good job to check all these boxes while still giving us, a little bit of freedom. I don't think anybody really has huge issues with the regulations on cable restraints. I think the biggest problem we have is, the old timers with the leg holds. I think that's I think that's the biggest argument, and I don't think there's really a big argument to get them back either. Personally, I think it would be awesome to go set leg holds for foxes, for coyotes, stuff like that. But I think a big thing that goes into that is you can't catch bobcats in New Jersey. And whether the state wants to believe it or not, we have a very healthy bobcat population. Not as much so in South Jersey, but I think the leg holds just eliminate that factor 100%. If that makes sense.
It does. And, you got to play with what you got, right? I mean, it sounds like you guys have... There's opportunity for sportsmen, right, for trapping. So it's hard to complain. I mean, especially New Jersey not being, historically red. I mean, there's a lot of conservatism and outdoor recreation, bear hunting, things like that in Jersey.
You don't have to sugarcoat it, I promise. I live here, I know.
Yeah. So with that said, like, it's just great that you even have opportunity and like getting to play within the regulations. And you're obviously successful, which is the other great thing. Like, you can mold to it and work it, and you filled your honor permit, which is awesome.
Yep. And I think somebody like me that let me backtrack. There's a lot of great opportunities in the state of New Jersey that people don't really see because we're over, we're shadowed by states like New York, states like Pennsylvania, states like, if you want to get into the waterfowl deal, states like Maryland. But like just like me, as somebody that doesn't really know a whole lot about trapping, we got into it, and the first year I trapped, I caught 6 raccoons. The second year I trapped, I caught that in 4 days. I caught 22 raccoons, 2 possums, and an otter this year. And that's being very, modest in the outdoors during, being very picky about my trap days and stuff like that. Only having trap set for 2 to 3 days at a time before kicking them off and got to go back to work. Overall, I just think there's a lot, somebody coming from like New York, PA, somewhere like that, they look at our digest and there is a lot of laws and regulations, but like you said, if you can mold to that, you really won't have an issue doing what you would love to do.
Yeah. And I'm going to hop in and ask you a question because I'm curious, like, you've only been doing it for a few seasons. Like, what was your triggering moment to get into trapping, as an adult?
So it was kind of the same thing as starting the podcast and Marsh Boys Outdoors itself. My buddy, my co-host Ryan, he's the co-founder of the LLC and everything like that. His family has a huge background. They lived during the fur boom. Their thing was muskrats, and that's a big thing in South Jersey too, with all the salt marshes we have, and just the tidal water and stuff like that, the Delaware Bay and all the tributaries. But we had done the hunting thing, we had fished, and that's another thing he loves to do is fish. And he came up to me one day and he goes, "Why don't we get our trapping license?" And I was like, I'm 100% down to do that. Like, I don't know how much of my time I'm going to give to trapping, but to have it is to have it, so we went and got it the next month at the very next trapping education class. And New Jersey's amazing about that. It's a 16-hour course, 2 days. They show you every single style trap. They have different sections. You got to go through every little section. Beaver, otter, mink muskrat, otter, everything like that. Raccoons, cage trapping, cables. They taught you how to set traps. They did everything to show you how to set your guide wire, everything like that. Very, very, educational. And we got it. And I think when trapping season opened, I bought my license and I trapped opening weekend, my first season, so last season. And I caught one raccoon. And that was, prior to the Marsh Boys deal, we ran raccoon dogs and we did all that. So, seeing a raccoon was nothing special to me, but I think what made it resonate more was it something that I went out and did. The dog didn't do all the work and I just came up to it in a tree. I went and found the spot. I found the tracks. I found the scat, whatever you do. And I set that trap there. And the next morning I found a raccoon. At the educational class, one of the main instructors, a man named Ron Jones, he had said, when you're trapping and you fall in love with trapping, every day is Christmas Day. And I felt that the first time I came up on a raccoon. Now, like I said, I had only trapped 6 that year. I was trapping state property that was over-trapped in my area and some few and far between private pieces my first season. And every time I would catch a raccoon, it was like, man, like that week and a half of not catching anything, like that makes up for it.
Yeah.
And I took that, and it snowballed. Like everything I do, I full force into it. Waterfowl, I killed a couple geese and I bought 10 dozen full body decoys. I have a trailer. Ducks, I killed a couple ducks. I got a brand new boat motor on my old John boat right now. So yeah, my trapping, it took a while. It took a while to buy the traps because they're not, unless you order them online, they're not hugely accessible around me. We don't, as to my knowledge, we've never had, like I've heard stories on yours of, a local trapping store. Maybe back in the 80s, but not now. So every opportunity, like we would go to Cabela's, they'd have some dog proofs, I'd buy them. Just this year, I'm up to 12 and a half that I set now every time. But yeah, like I said, it just snowballed. And I love goose hunting more than anything. That is my shtick. That's my deal. Trapping's.
I need to come out. I've never done goose hunting. I need to come out and goose hunt with you.
And I added a dog, a couple seasons ago too, and my dog Goose, and that's made it even better. But trapping's very easily becoming, close to a close first to that or close second to that.
That's awesome. I think that's a good nod for people who are listening on both sides of that on the house. I love to see more adults getting into it and recognizing that it's a solid form of recreation as much as goose hunting, duck hunting, big game hunting. It's something where you can learn. It's accessible. In most states, there's some form of it that's accessible, and you learn a lot.
Absolutely.
And it's a lot of fun. And it's like I always tell people, I'm sure when you got in the water around that bridge with that otter, like there's nothing more compelling or like a time machine to feel like it's just you, like in a one-on-one situation that you got yourself into that is just exciting and really cool to experience.
Yeah. I've decoyed hundreds of geese, a bunch of ducks. I've never, you go back. So before all this, not to talk about myself too much, but I rodeoed. I rode bulls for 7 years. And when I would sit down on a bull, everything else would disappear. You know, if anybody listening's ever been to a rodeo, you know how loud the announcer is, you know how loud the crowd is, the music, how bright the lights are. All of that would disappear. That was one of the first times I've experienced that since, was Ryan sitting up on top of the bridge watching everything, talking to me, and I couldn't hear him. I couldn't hear the water rolling. I couldn't hear rock sliding. All I saw was me and the otter and how to deal with this. And, you know, it very, very good feeling.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, those experiences only come so often, and it's one of those ones that can pop up. Hopefully with some frequency trapping. It's not always the case, especially if you're wolf trapping or otter trapping for that matter. It's a long game for sure.
Yeah, 100%. So did you ever have a feeling like that like time stopped for a minute? You know, whether it be...
Yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was going to say a lot, actually. I mean, like you said, in sports, like I grew up doing wrestling and jiu-jitsu and, you know, just getting in fights, I feel like you're in that. I mean, whether you're fighting a bull or a person, it's just that you're locked in, everything else drowns out.
Yep. That was also a really, really funny story about how you got into wrestling. I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, well, yeah, you know, Matt's win sometimes, definitely embarrassing in a lot of different instances, but, you know, we overcame it. But you have those. I mean, like the first time I had a bull called in, like a bull elk, you know, 300 plus size bull. Like that was one of those moments, like when you're sitting there with a bow. I missed, you know, for what it's worth. However, you know, like that was one of those time stand still moments for me. And then with trapping, it's the same thing. Like the first time I ran a wolf, a mountain lion, you know, honestly, like marten has been really big for me. And usually those are in conibears, but past 2 seasons, I've done some work for AFWA doing like their best management practices in live traps, which again, talking about having to mold to non-prime trapping approaches, like a live trap of a pine marten's very hard. But man, when you come up on them in a live trap, it's the same thing. It's like you see an otter for the first time, and maybe when you saw your otter, you're like, oh, dang, that little sucker's cute. And then it lunges at you with its teeth open, and same with the marten. You know, they're vicious killers. And those are moments that time stand still for sure when you're just one-on-one with those animals.
I have to say, I had that moment, not when I first saw the otter, because everything that everybody told me had rushed into my head. Like, be very, very careful. Mm-hmm. After the animals, and I think I always have this feeling, whether it be a raccoon, a possum, a goose, a duck. Every time I dispatch an animal, you know, I cannot help but to thank that animal. And that's the most personal you're ever going to get with an otter, with a, you know, even if you want to boil it down to a goose, to a deer, to, in your point, an elk or a wolf. And the first time I laid physical hands on an otter, feeling how soft it was, how much muscle was packed into that little body, you know, that was a wild, wild feeling, very personal and, you know, wild feeling to me.
Yeah. And, you know, that's what our forefathers and great grandparents and everybody founding this country got to experience, and it's been lost. So it's a rarity these days too. And I think a lot of trappers, especially people who've been doing it a long time, probably take it for granted. You know, it's it can definitely become, you know, part of the job, so to speak. But I mean, I think it's good to take a second. And a lot of trappers, even old timers, they still do. But you know, it's something that should be done with reverence and you know, kindness.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah. I agree to everything about that. You know, and you've reiterated this on your side of the podcast. I don't know how many times. I don't think there is a single person that has more respect for what we are ultimately dispatching and taking out of the ecosystem than the person doing it. If they're in the right state of mind. I think if they're the right person, I have so much respect for the common raccoon. I have an abundance of respect, not only for the physical embodiment of an otter, but for the attitude of an otter now.
Yeah.
And that's something that I hope to God never goes away. You know, like I said about 40 minutes ago. Raccoons are very, very witty creatures. I think people give them the benefit of the doubt a lot. And I'm not saying it's extremely hard to go catch a raccoon because it's really not, but to consistently catch them, I think there's a trick to be had. And I think you have to have a respect and you have to pay attention.
And I think on top of that too, I mean, I guess this is a good question for you too. I think trapping, and like you said, when you were first going after your raccoons, that first raccoon you caught, you were on sign, found tracks, found scat, studied the area. Like, have you found in the last 2 seasons you've been trapping, has like anything that you've picked up from trapping translated to your other hunting?
Patience. So real quick, I'll backtrack because you said when I caught my first raccoon. What's really, really funny about that is Ryan. So I had set my traps on opening day. Ryan waited till the weekend to set. And I told him, I said, hey, I'm trapping a pretty, a decent piece for New Jersey, about a 40, 50 acre piece. Why don't you come set, so we can do it all together for our first weekend. I was like, oh yeah, absolutely. So we're driving in the truck down the lane, and he goes, stop. I want to set right here. And I'm like, no, why would you want to do that? And he goes, what do you mean? I was like, well, I got a trap 20 yards ahead there. And he goes, well, I really like this spot. I'm like, you know what? Go for it. Go trap. And where I had my trap set was like really, really thick brush along a water line and then an opening to really, really more thick brush. So I figured that was kind of a pinch point. They would come and get in that opening. And he sets it. We used the same bait at the time. We come back the next day, and he had caught in his set. I was like, you got to be kidding me, man. But
something about intuition, I guess.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I forget the second part of the question you had.
Well, just if anything had like translated, like you said, the patience like into your other hunting.
Yeah, definitely patience, and I think it's what I mean. I think what I mean is patience is with me running dog proofs. It's very easy to be like, wow, I haven't caught anything here in 4 days. Let me pick up and go 100 yards over, and then you come back the next day, and along the water line there's a bunch of tracks, a bunch of raccoon, possum tracks. I think that's translated into deer hunting. I'm not a huge deer hunter. I got a deer on the wall. It's nothing special. We eat a lot of wild game in my house. That's why I deer hunt. I killed an okay buck this year, and I think the patience aspect dealt into that because, so many times I had my pin drawn on a doe. And I was like, well, I don't have too many does in this area on this property. I should probably wait for a buck. And about a week later, it came to fruition. I shot my buck. In goose hunting, especially, I think in goose hunting, the patience aspect has, like I said, be a little more patient with the birds and let them work a little more, get better, cleaner shots at them. I think trapping has definitely helped me with that.
Yeah, I'll second that. I mean, even with me, I think back to like my big game hunting before I started trapping, and really, I think every single mistake that I made in the outdoors, like whether it be hunting, like bushcraft stuff, camping, whatever, everything that's gone wrong has been due in some way to rushing something.
Yeah.
Or not being patient. So I think that's a big one, and one that I've taken too. Not always the best at applying it. I like to think I am, but it's work in progress for me.
I think every hunter that has grown into trapping has realized this as well. There is nothing, and I mean nothing, that will teach you more about the outdoors than trapping. And I mean that. So when you're deer hunting, a lot of times you're looking up. You're never looking at the ground. When I trap, there's a lot of times I'll fall over a log or I'll get tangled in briars because I'm following tracks. I'm following a fox track, following a coon track. I'm looking at an otter slide. And you just learn so much more about the landscape with your eyes down. Mm-hmm. And I never realized that till I really learned that, hey, I really want to trap. Like after the first couple of raccoons I caught, I was like, I really want to do this. And I started paying way more attention. I remember, I want to say it was the second property I got on. The first piece of private property I ever got on. I did the whole OnX hunt stand thing. I looked online, looked at the topo maps and everything, and figured out what kind of area I wanted to start with. So I went back there, and it was just happened to be where a creek runs through. And I remember I felt like knee deep into the creek because I had saw weird tracks that led to like this pile of scat. And I was following it, and I stepped in. And then, a couple weeks later when I started thinking about trapping otters, it clicked. I went back. That was an otter toilet.
Yep. That's awesome. Listen, Brian, I don't know about you, but I'm going to have to run here in a little bit for kid bedtime, but we should do this again. I mean, on all accounts, this was an awesome conversation. I love talking to other trappers who are relatively new. And I do want to come goose hunting with you because that's on my list of things that I want to do in the future. But
if you ever find yourself in New Jersey, you're more than welcome.
Perfect, man. Well, I appreciate it, and I appreciate the time.
Let me switch the roles real quick for 2 minutes.
Oh yeah, I got a little bit more time. We're good.
So I'm not sure if you've ever been asked this, but I know you ask it quite often. What was the biggest mistake you think you've ever made on the trap line?
What's the big? That's a good one, man. Yeah, I haven't been on the other receiving end of that. Now I see why it's such a stumper sometimes because I've made so many mistakes. It's actually one that's going to be very relevant to what you just said about moving your dog proofs. So my first really 2 seasons of wolf trapping, I didn't have a good understanding really of the cycles for these wolves. So like I'd put steel on the ground and, I'd wait, 2 weeks, 14 days. And I'd be like, man, there was sign here. There's nothing coming. And instead of just leaving steel on the ground, I'd pack them up and I'd move them somewhere else where I think I saw sign or, there was newer sign.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you'd go back to the spot that you trapped and took them up and there's, new fresh sign over it. So, being patient, that was the biggest mistake, especially in wolf trapping, is just moving steel, not letting it just sit and marinate as long as it needed to.
Well, that's pretty much wraps up all I had.
Cool, Brian. Well, I appreciate it. We'll do it again. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Definitely would like to have you back on, another conversation.
All right, brother. Well, we'll catch you next time then.
Yes, sir. Thank you.